Evening, everybody, and welcome to the Before It's Built podcast. This is the first official podcast episode that we'll be running, and we'll have a few more over the next couple of weeks. Today, I'm going to be speaking to Qutaibah, I'm after pronouncing your name again, correct? Tafi. He's an architect, certified passive home designer, a Green Star accredited professional, thermal assessor, and a writer. He's also the circular design lead for Breathe Architecture. He was born in Iraq. He grew up in New Zealand and is now based in Melbourne. He has over 15 years of experience across Australia, Japan, and he's also working at the intersection of architecture, sustainability, low carbon construction. His work spans residential, multi-unit residential, commercial projects, and he's a very, very strong advocate for evidence-based circularity and low-impact environmental architecture. He works for Breathe Architecture, as I mentioned. It is a certified B Corp. They have been carbon neutral in their practice since 2018, and they're a founding signatory of the Architects Declare movement. The practice uses design as a tool for ecological and social and economic impact, with a clear commitment to net zero ready buildings and a climate positive built environment. We'll talk today about Breathe's approach to circularity, how we break down barriers, how sustainability ambitions become real project outcomes, and what designers can do to make better material decisions within their designs. Before we do get into the technical side, can I ask you, you spoke recently at the AIA Regenerative Design Symposium. What was your key takeaway from that? And was there anything that stood out from it?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Barry. It's great to be on your podcast, and that was a very generous introduction. So yeah, I spoke on behalf of Breathe at the Regenerative Design Symposium. We were the Sustainability Leadership Prize winners last year, and that was the reason why we were invited to provide the keynote speech there. Essentially, what I spoke about was over, I think close to 25 years of body of work at Breathe, and I guess a couple of topics we covered, other than the body of work, is we discussed our current sustainability action plan, which was updated this year. I'll sort of talk a bit more about that in a second. And also critically, our observation that both at a federal level, but also in our industry, we have noticed a little bit of a retreat when it comes to sustainability and circularity. And again, I'll touch on a bit more about that in a second as well. So just firstly, it's great that you gave the background to Breathe Architecture. I wanted to just maybe fill in a few gaps there, if I may. So Breathe was founded in 2001 by Jeremy McLeod and Tamara Valtre, as I like to call her Tam Tam. She doesn't want to be called Tamara for some reason. So whilst a lot of our focus remains on delivering housing, Breathe's body of work spans, and I'm not sure if your viewers know this, but commercial, hospitality, workplace, and then lately a string of substations, believe it or not, which is interesting. So
lots of concrete used in substations.
Yeah, there's lots of concrete. Yeah, there's lots of concrete. And those buildings, last, well over 100 years if they're built correctly. So I think it's good that we're involved in things that usually architects aren't involved in. Just another theme probably that we can talk about. So to give you some perspective, 2001, I don't know where you were, but I was still in high school, and back then the building code didn't even have any energy efficiency requirements for dwellings in particular. So I believe the energy ratings came in 2003 from memory. So despite all this, from the very beginning, the mission was very clear. And that is that Breathe was set out to create impactful quality work with a sense of place, but also a strong focus on genuine sustainability. And sustainability, crucially, and this is something that I covered in the keynote speech as well, this was a takeaway for all the architects in the room, is that sustainability done properly, it just can't be a bolt-on. It has to be integrated into the workflow right from the beginning. And also, lastly, that Breathe was not going to wait for legislation and for the planning scheme and for the code to catch up in order to do these. In order to deliver on its mission. So that was really sort of the crux of the keynote. And we looked through some example case study projects that that explained a lot of our, our 6 priorities in our sustainability action plan that we
Yeah,
resolved recently.
I do have a couple of questions about your sustainability
Please.
action plan, but look, let you finish up on with your train of thought, and what we can do is we can move on to it.
Yeah, no, that was it. I mean, I think the
Yep.
next thing I just wanted to maybe talk about is the sort of the state of play in sustainability. I can probably talk more about Australia, but maybe you can offer a bit more insight about New
100%.
Zealand, where
Yeah.
you're based. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. What we'll do is I do have a couple of questions later on just about what's holding us back or as an industry. So maybe if we kind of push it in there a little bit. In relation to your sustainability action plan, New Zealand doesn't have an equivalent. So just for anybody from New Zealand that is watching, can you just, like in one sentence, tell us what a sustainability action plan is?
Yeah. So it is Breed's action plan. Just want to be clear about that. And it is a framework that we rely on in our office to deliver on our sustainability commitments, right? So sustainability, very broad term, a very, I'd say, possibly abused term in the industry. It's, what is it to us? What are our priorities there? We established a sustainability action plan in 2022, and since then we know that we're in a trifecta crises, if you will. So we're in a climate crisis, of course, and we're in a housing crisis here in Australia. We're also in a cost of living crisis. So we know that we really needed to reframe it as a set of priorities, right? So if we weren't going to achieve every single one of them on every single project, and we're affecting meaningful progress, well, that's good, but we've got to try, right?
Mhm.
So
So what you're saying there is that there was a refresh from 2022 up to this year where did the goals change or did they just evolve?
So a bit of both. So the goals, in accordance with the Green Building Council, the sort of performance goals need to ratchet up in order to get to net zero. So we have ratcheted up some of these goals. We've also clarified and readdressed some of the goals as well. So I suppose I can sort of run you through it, but big picture, I wanted to kind of make very clear to your viewers is that building and construction is quite a big player in global emissions, right? And
Depending on how you look at it, some people say it's about 26%, but when you go to full life cycle and operations of those buildings, it could be upwards
that's right.
of
So
46%. I think. Yeah.
we refer to the Green Building Council quite a fair bit with their studies, and in 2019, this has been a while now, and I think it's been updated since, I believe. We understand that construction and buildings is responsible for about 39% of global emissions. So it's fair whack, right? So of that, 28 is operational. So that's the heating and cooling, lighting, hot water, all that sort of stuff. And then the remaining is the upfront embodied. That's locked in and it can't be really offset later on.
Yeah, and I think it's a critical consideration, isn't it? Because with your operation, you do get a couple of bites of the cherry during the lifespan of a building. It does get replaced more often than the fabric or than the actual structure of a building. But when you're talking about embodied carbon, is as soon as you design it, it's more than likely locked in for the lifespan of the build.
That's right. Yeah. And interestingly, there's been a big focus in the industry on operational carbon and emissions. And that's great because obviously it's the lower hanging fruit. And this is why, like in our set of priorities, we've got 6 of them. 3 of those deal with operational, and then the remaining 3 attempt to have a crack at the upfront embodied. So if I was to, without making this a really boring list, right? So I'll just go right from the top. It's 100% green power, right? That's priority number 1. Number 2 is 100% electric. So where electrification is really important. It's not number 1 because at the moment in Australia, our grid, or I should say in Victoria, more specifically, our grid is essentially generated with, made up of 50 to 60% burning of fossil fuels into the atmosphere. So that's brown coal and natural gas. There's a big push on renewables, and part of the reason for that is because more and more people are purchasing 100% green power from the retailer. Right now, that the put the cynicism aside, right? When it comes to large generation certificates and offsets and that sort of stuff, but it does send a signal to those retailers that more people want renewable energy, right? So there's a lot more investment in that. Second part to that first priority is generating as much as possible on site and also storing it via batteries. So PV cells and batteries. And what we say is, if every one of our projects generates around 120% of our demands, right, we should be quickly doing our job to decarbonize the grid. So that's priority number one, 100% green power. Number two is 100% electric. So in our view, we believe at Breathe that the future is electric, right? And if you haven't got on board with that, you're going to be left behind extremely quickly. In Victoria, there's still a lot of natural gas being plumbed into old dwellings. So the regulations changed. So no new dwellings can have gas anymore, which is good. But those dwellings that are still connected to gas, they will find themselves very quickly becoming stranded assets. And the reason for that is because people are leaving gas in droves, and the cost of maintaining that infrastructure will be shouldered by.
It's funny that you say that. Australia is very, very clearly moving in a certain direction around energy and energy production. Across here in New Zealand, where I am at the moment, we have a government in place that is moving in the opposite direction. They're talking about investing 100 billion in LNG, which has always been a periphery energy source here, and subsidizing that. So it's a market change in direction for New Zealand. We do have a very clean energy grid to begin with.
Yeah, lots of hydro, right?
There's lots of hydro, and growing solar installations as well going on. There's no subsidies here at a domestic level for solar, but we're definitely seeing, I guess, a change in the current government that we've had of policies that are almost reversing some of the good work that has been done around energy.
We're noticing similar things here, but
yeah, it's not great, and I think it needs people like us to be out there talking about it, and actually not just accepting that these things are changing, and that there is a bit of a slide back, but actually pushing for advocacy for, and subsidies for cleaner energy. But you touched on embodied carbon then as well. So the operational carbon is going unfortunately one direction here from an energy perspective, but from a embodied carbon perspective here in New Zealand as well, it's unfortunately stalled as well. So there was legislation that was meant to be released 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that is now completely stalled as well. So we are seeing a lot more happening in Australia.
Yeah, so I guess to touch on what you said earlier, we outside Victoria. So Australia's still a whole bunch of states and territories, and they all do the different things, right? Outside of Victoria and the ACT, gas is still in play, right? Apart from the Sydney area, I believe, which is
that's the city of Sydney, as opposed to broader New South
I believe
Wales.
so. Yeah. So what we say, and the Sustainability Action Plan, just by the way, it's aimed just as much as people outside our organization, but mainly for the architects that are working on our projects. So we say to them that it's your job, guys, my job, when I'm doing architectural work, to advocate for the removal of fossil fuel outside of states like the ACT and Victoria, where it's regulation, right? So a place like WA, and
that's that whole principle of not waiting for legislation, but actually pushing on and making.
Yeah. So I think that and sorry, that the other third priority that we have regarding operational energy is high performance. So we design higher than minimum standard performance at Breathe, and in most states in Australia, we have the system called NATERS, which rates housing in terms of thermal efficiency, heating and cooling from on a scale of 1 to 10. The pass rate at the moment since 2023 has been a 7-star, and we aim for 7.9 stars. The reason for that is because the star star ratings don't increase in a linear fashion. They increment up and up. They're not quite exponential, but to give you an idea, a tangible idea, in a Melbourne climate, the 7.9 star sweet spot that we aim for equates to about 25% less heating and cooling than just the bare minimum pass. So it's our sweet spot because it balances the capital expenditure upfront versus human comfort, and also it builds in some fat for long-term climate resilience, because we know that the planet, of course, is warming, and so our climate is changing. So if you have a bare minimum pass envelope today, it won't be in the future. And also, I don't know what it's like in New Zealand. Whilst I was educated in New Zealand, I didn't practice in New Zealand. Energy performance is not as built verified here, so it's theoretical only. So there's a gap between what we predict on paper versus what gets built, and that's why we aim for that number.
Yeah, I think you guys had a great line, which was basically measure, design, measure.
That's it. Yeah.
So I love that, because it's almost like the old carpenter's rule of measure twice, cut once. But you are checking at multiple times during the design stage, which means that you're moving from validation into impact.
That's it. Yeah. So a really big mantra that we have here is to use thermal models, to use LCAs as design tools, not as verification. And I sort of, you asked me for a statement the other day. I think the really important thing is that we're doing this proactively, not after the horse has bolted, when you can't really change anything. You're just essentially recording, right? So that's a really important. So this leads me really nicely into the remaining three priorities, which address embodied upfront carbon. So build less, give more. That's a really important one for us. So it's all about structural efficiency. If you've done enough LCAs, you know that an inefficient structure is a huge impact on the upfront carbon of a building, and it might take just a few transfers, all that steel, all that reinforcement, all the offsetting services that we need to calculate, that they really blow out and really impact the upfront emissions of a building. And we also, I think what we do is we start with a design brief. It starts as early as that. We're interrogating the design brief by asking, do we really need that basement? Basements are very concrete heavy. Concrete is not the problem. It's cement. But if we can remove as much basement as possible, we will do that. Do we need that second bathroom? Do we need that second? Do we need the unnecessary linings to the walls and ceilings? And interestingly, that's become integrated in a lot of the Nightingale housing. That I'm not sure if your viewers are familiar with that. Breathe.
Tell us about it. Yeah, it's a real interesting model.
We were one of the sort of founding directors of Nightingale Housing. Without going into too much detail, Nightingale is an incredible housing model, a triple bottom line housing model, prioritizing people and the planet, and of course, whilst being profitable at the same time. And I think having lived and still do live near and right next to a Nightingale, I can see that people are very much on mission who live there. They live the lifestyle, and also quite a close knit community. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that there are a lot of shared facilities, right? So instead of having a laundry each in your own home, there is a shared laundry upstairs and clotheslines, and that in itself goes beyond sustainability, right? I think I just want to take a little sidestep here and just say that architects, and probably myself in the past, right, are very guilty about talking about sort of framing sustainability as a more of a performance thing. We're just interested in, we kind of speak about it in a very nerdy way, right? And it's not very accessible for everyone else in society. What's more important about these things is the bigger picture. So what does that do? Sharing facilities like laundries and clotheslines, it creates these incidental moments where we can build community, we can talk to each other, we can check on each other, and so that is really, really, really important. And it comes down to, again, we start by thinking about building less and giving more. It's a pretty good example of that. But also part of that is making sure that we try to, as much as possible, maximize biogenic materials, timber and hemp and clay, so sequestering carbon in our buildings rather than emitting them.
Yep. No, I love that. I love the fact that the social side comes into the way you design. I'm probably pulling you off point a little bit, but how do you have you got clients coming to you asking for that type of development, or are you guys convincing your clients that these are the type of developments they should be building?
So there definitely is a lot of advocacy. I mean, I think at Breathe, we're very fortunate to quite often work with very like-minded clients who know what we do, who are aware of our capabilities, and want to do that. But at the same time, it is, being a developer is very risky, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for developers, and I know the risk they take, and I know the margins can be fairly thin, especially if they're doing the right thing and they're trying to push the envelope a little bit and join us on the journey with, creating impactful, genuinely sustainable developments. So I understand that, but they generally, there's a lot of advocacy, regardless of how on mission a client might be at the very beginning, because, the reality is that everything costs money, right? And this is where I sort of go back and say that sustainability needs to be embedded, because whilst I say there is a commercial reality to the decisions we make, when we make those decisions also matters, because at the very beginning of a project, things can be very malleable. right? Everyone's a lot more open to exploring new materials, new methods of construction, that sort of stuff. As we progress through the design process, things get locked in, and it is no secret that a lot of construction, a lot of development is run by a spreadsheet with a whole bunch of preconceived ideas and assumptions that start really at site acquisition, basically at the feasibility.
Yeah. But there's a lot of similarities between the way projects are costed and the way people are perceiving or people are trying to measure carbon emissions from their build, especially the embodied carbon. It's that, again, that retrospective validation of having you guys design something and then going and checking it and finding out you have a problem, and then you've got to go back in and redesign for cost.
Yeah.
It's frustrating for everybody involved. It's frustrating for the architect because you're usually removing value from the build as opposed to actually finding cost savings.
That's
And
right.
it's the same when it comes to carbon emissions. As you said, it becomes less malleable if the design has been somewhat completed. It's far harder to retrospectively go back in. It's wasting time. So that whole premise of going early. So from your design brief, actually understanding what you're trying to achieve and why decisions are actually being made is critical to getting better outcomes. And unfortunately, we have an industry that is so heavily embedded in retrospective analysis from a cost perspective and from a sustainability perspective. We never get the outcomes we should be getting. And there's often just opportunities and sometimes substantial opportunities left on the table.
Yeah, I mean that you're sort of leading me really nicely in our fifth priority, which is measuring embodied carbon. This is exactly what I was sort of going to talk about next. But I suppose, firstly, zooming back, I think we can all appreciate that if we can't measure something, we can't fix it, right? But it's much better to be measuring something during the design process, starting early, than it is to, as you said, retrospectively just record some, right? So I guess what we do is we use life cycle analysis integrated with our BIM, and at the very beginning, we work with just a development summary, and then we have tonnage based on benchmarking, and then we can say, okay, is it heading in the right direction? Is it not? And then once we get to the level where there is a 3D model, we can very quickly start to understand the impacts of design iterations and changes and permutations, and we can start to optimize. So again, very similar to the thermal model, using that as a design tool rather than just pure compliance, we are also using life cycle analysis to track. I guess specifically, we're tracking modules A1 to A5. So I believe it's called cradle to handover. So it includes transportation to site and also an allowance for construction as well.
And you do that on every single project?
Yeah, so every one of our projects start. So we've started to do that this year, and we were doing a little bit of that before that as well. So I sort of, at this point, I need to acknowledge that the tremendous amount of work that my colleague Paddy Kelly did to establish that workflow here at Breathe, and we're using as much as possible our BIM capabilities to get that work, get those quantities out, and be able to understand what moves the needle and where we're getting diminishing returns, and it's not making much of a difference. It does really impact the way we design. It does impact our design decisions, what we say to clients, what we advocate for. So it's really important.
I think that's a critical thing, isn't it, within the design process of being able to find where the actual impact is, as opposed to running down rabbit holes, designing parts of the build that just didn't give you the impact that you were expecting. Again, often only comes out in validation afterwards, kind of workflows, that you didn't get the impact you were expecting. So again, it's that whole extracting quantities while you're designing and running the analysis while you're designing that is actually getting you the impact or showing you where the opportunities are. Right?
That's right. I mean, I think also, I guess amongst architects, I'd say very few people would be doing life cycle analysis, which is a huge missed opportunities. And I think part of that, if I was to sort of point and go, okay, well, why aren't more architects doing that? It's that I believe they sort of perceive it as a difficult thing to do. There's this conception that it's complex. Quantity surveyors do it, we don't, and it's very expensive. No client will be wanting to pay for that. But for us, it's baked into our process, right? It's what we do. It's part of doing business here.
Well, you have the ability to extract the quantities, and
That's right.
It's not every material that you're measuring. You know what I mean? So it's not a big a task as people tend to think that it actually is. So and as you said earlier on, the first step is measuring. So just get it out.
Also just track it and measure it, and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Like I think quite often and I'm sort of, in the past, a bit guilty of that myself, being, I suppose, an analytical person. I always say, at the moment, I'm sort of changed my mind. I said, don't never let perfection be the enemy of progress, and quite often you can be scared into doing nothing. That's certainly not the right thing to do. I think as long as you're measuring consistently, you can then track. That's probably the most important bit, and it starts somewhere, right? And I think following agreed industry protocols like neighbors really important, because then we're measuring the right thing when we're talking to other architects about tonnage and about about how this building performs and this one doesn't. We are talking about the same thing. We are measuring things equally, which is I think another challenge when we're talking about LCA versus whole of life and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of sort of misinformation, well, lack of education, I'd say, in that field. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, misconceptions out there are rife when it comes to both carrying out LCA, but also the materials that are used in your building and how they actually perform. So is there any one misconception that you would say that keeps repeating over and over and over again that you'd like to just go, we've had enough of
Yeah.
this now?
I guess, and this has come up recently, concrete. So there's obviously concrete is a very carbon, or can be very carbon intensive material. The benefits of concrete, are obvious, right? The durability, the fire rating, the structural compressive strength, all these things, right? So I suppose for us, we do need to balance that against the use or the application. Firstly, so reducing the amount of concrete as much as possible, making sure that our structures are efficient, resisting the urge or the planning, I should say, the town planning pressure to create a wedding cake building, which quite often, interestingly, results in a fairly sort of less ideal architectural outcome in itself, both in the fees that we spend in resolving these offsets and these different floor plates, but also just the way it looks and presents to the street as an architecture. So there's that. And I suppose knowing that it's actually the cement that's the issue, right? This, the cement content is the clinker cement is a big emitter, not so much the remaining parts of the concrete ready mix. So we've been speaking to, and this is part of my role and part of our sort of, the what we do at Breathe, the amount of research is that we've been speaking to people like Boral and also Wholesome about their concrete ready mixes. And it's very interesting to work out, for example, and not that Breathe or myself is, advocating for one brand and over the other, but it is interesting, for example, that Wholesome is offering up to 70% reduced carbon concrete at no extra over, for example. So it's just a matter of asking these things, being aware of what they are
Yeah,
and
we're
asking
starting to
them.
see similar movements here as well in New Zealand. We've got a company here who do precast concrete and precast pipework and things like that. And as standard, they no longer sell standard concrete products. Everything, and there's no extra cost, same cost, but the products are just low. They're lowered embodied carbon products. Heinz Concrete are the company here in New Zealand, and there's some amazing research and some amazing products that will be coming to the market as well. I think over the next couple of years. I can only speak really to the New Zealand ones, but I know there's lots happening across in the US as well. Rock Extract here they're in Wellington. They came out of the university and they're effectively reducing carbon emissions within concrete, I think down to about 90% reduction.
Yeah.
No, it's all still not theoretical, but it is still obviously prototyping at the moment. And then you've got another entity called Aspiring Materials coming out of Christchurch, again out of the university there, and they're working with materials that have been deconstructed, aggregates that have been deconstructed, reconstructed to absorb carbon, and then put into products like concrete to actually make them a carbon sink. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot of innovation from the concrete industry over the next couple of years because
I'm
they
hoping.
have to. They
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah. At the moment, it's basically fly ash and slag as the cement alternative, but there are other, I suppose, binders and aggregates coming into play, recycled aggregates. Well, but I think going back to what we said earlier, like understanding the commercial impacts of the decisions that we make. So whilst we are massive advocates of low carbon concrete where we are using concrete, we do understand that it does impact the curing time of concrete. And so, um, having those discussions very early on, going back to the iterative nature of LCAs rather than just LCA at the end, really helps really set the program. If the contractor is engaged on an ECI or early contractor involvement, they're well aware of this. It doesn't become, I guess, a fight or a pugilist endeavor where we're just, there's this sort of idea that any decisions we are making with regards to the specs is eroding people's bottom line. They're all well aware of it. That's what we're doing, and then the contractors are able to sequence other works with that. So that really is another plus to or another reason to be doing LCAs incrementally. So we do three, minimum two to three, depending on the project, and the more information we get, more information early on, and then we are making a few assumptions. Sorry, we get more information later on, and we make a few more assumptions earlier in the process. But that still it does help.
So you said that you do it 2 to 3 times. So you would do it at your very earliest design stage, maybe concept design.
Feasibility, yeah,
Again,
feasibility based on development summaries, and then town planning, or it goes into town planning, because at that point we have a 3D model with a pretty good level of detail. We model in our office with composites, and so it's a pretty sophisticated way of modeling with our templates. Shannon and the other guys in the office have done a great job with our template, and it's just a work in progress the whole time. The old template, keep working, chipping away on that. But yeah, that's good. I just lastly, sorry, I wanted to just cover our last priority before I forget. We move on to another subject. So the sixth priority at Breathe in our sustainability action plan is circularity. We're very much at the start of that journey with circularity. Is a whole world out there, and I suppose we're aware that seeing something like 40 to 45% of all waste is related to construction, and so what's really clear for us is that we need to abandon this linear consumption sort of, status quo that we've got at the moment, where we're extracting, we're making, we're using, and we're dumping. We have to be closing the loop with circular materials, repurposing, upcycling, and hopefully either maintaining the value of the materials through its use, or increasing in some instances. So I suppose the more astute clients that we work with, those who are looking to retain assets long term, understand that these buildings are actually better viewed as banks for materials in the future, right? So, and in order to do that, we are already thinking, not just thinking, but also detailing a design for disassembly. So we say to our architects and also our clients that we're looking to assemble rather than build. And the difference between that is that we're not gluing, we're bolting things together so that we can reverse them at the end of life, and then we can keep using the stuff.
I think you already see that kind of, I'm not, I can't speak to Australia too much, but you definitely see that in New Zealand. I think just because there's so remote a location to the world that I think as a culture, New Zealand has gotten used to reusing products at a very low level, not at your big corporate level buildings, but houses. People are taking their salvage material and reusing them in sheds, or reusing them in farm buildings, or reusing them to create glass houses, or multiple different uses. And it's happened for 150 years. It's just scaling that up to bigger buildings so that it's easier to actually retrieve the materials and actually have, I guess, a predetermined use case for them. There's some other, I know that some other design practices we've been speaking to, they're looking at, when they design a building, they design it twice. They've designed it as an apartment block, and then they've also shown how those materials can actually be used as a farmer's barn, or six farmers' barns in 50 years' time or 100 years' time, when that building is actually taken back down, which I think is, it's a great initiative, because it's shown that there's a forward plan to actually use those materials, not just a conceptual idea that these will be used in some way in the future.
Yeah, I like what you said about the geographical distance that New Zealand has, and similarly with Australia, and that's probably one of the reasons why traditionally, New Zealand been, I think they call it number 8 wire, don't they? It's
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
a
Yeah.
thing where very resourceful is a very good word to describe a New Zealander. Similarly, I know that I've heard recently that in Australia, in a lot of places, we are running out of landfill area as well, and so we've got to divert as much of this construction waste away from landfill. It's really important that we do that. Some really great initiatives around some great products, making use of post-consumer feedstock. We've got there's we're good friends with Safeboard, the guys at Safeboard. They're a Kiwi
Yeah.
outfit.
We actually recorded a podcast with them just yesterday. So yeah,
Good.
you'll
Yeah,
be seeing
yeah,
that one as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Paul
So
he's a great guy.
yeah, he's a good guy, and yeah, it's just Tetra Pak, and it's not. I just think probably the big thing there is that it's not just some niche product. That they're really rolling out some big sort of significant scale. You know,
100%.
highway
And
barriers and
the product isn't a compromise.
no,
It's in some cases better than the equivalent that sits in the market already, you know?
that's right. Yeah. So there's a huge push. Also, like in our team, I've got working with Claire Louise Sal, who's worked on the housing projects for the Paris Olympics. She brings together all for us a whole bunch of expertise in circularity, which I think is a lot more sophisticated than we currently are in this sort of DFD stage. But we're getting there and we're working on it. But you know, as you know, there's a whole bunch of challenges when it comes to proposing alternative materials and alternative methods, and largely it comes down to cost, Barry. Like it's a really big one, and I suppose, like I said earlier, we are fortunate that we generally work with pretty aligned clients who are happy to explore things. Yeah,
Yeah. I think the cost is obviously, it's very key in decision making. But again, it also often comes retrospectively. So you test a material, you design it in, and then you find out afterwards that you need to find savings, and it has to come back out of your design. So
yeah,
it is again critical to understand early how much these things are costing, so that you're making decisions not just for that material, but for other materials in the building that may facilitate this material. Because often there's so many decisions that lock in poor decisions that lock in methodologies and materials that can't be changed afterwards. But if they had been analyzed and you went and looked at what the alternatives were and you had the time to do that, you will find a better outcome, and it may pay for a material somewhere else in the building that is giving you impact.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think it's critical that we start thinking about life cycle of buildings
I
within the
think so.
design, which not just the material in itself in isolation, but as a whole building. Make better decisions to get a better life cycle performance.
Mm. No, I totally agree with that.
I do have another set of questions here for you, but it's we're probably running a little bit over time, so I will ask you one more, and that is, what's holding the rest of the industry back? You guys are pushing forward heavily into this and really committing to your sustainability action plan, to being advocates and to being vocal around what's happening in the market, or what should happen in the market. We often hear from architects that we speak to that they don't have the time, or they can't find the materials. They're looking, but they can't find anything. What would your advice to them be? What would you say they should be starting with, or the biggest impact for them would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice is to first of all attend as many of these events as possible and just really educate yourself. I am every day learning something new and just being aware of what's out there and the good people doing good things. And also, the other thing is, I think that there's a current growing sense in our industry, architectural industry, of sort of complacency and this framing quality architecture as a as it exists in a vacuum, right? And that architects should be, in particular, should be sticking to their knitting, right? So there's actually, like, this is actually happening in our industry at the moment, which is very concerning. And I think I guess Breed's work and a whole bunch of other really great architects in Australia and New Zealand and elsewhere in Europe as well, in America. There are a lot of examples of offices creating timeless work with a sense of place, but also being able to create impact with circularity, material selection, with performance, and being able to work as an architect or as a practitioner in this industry, understanding the impacts of decisions you make, but also the inputs of external forces well outside the site boundary. So for some reason, architects are very focused, I suppose, on what's happening within the site, which is important. Keeping the water out, very important, of course. Resolving detailing, regulations, spatial planning. Those are very core things of what we do, but also understanding that things that are aspects outside the site that have a high impact. And number one is of course where's the energy coming from? What
Uh,
is powering this thing? And also, where did the materials come from?
Mhm.
You know,
Asking
how
deeper
far do they
questions.
travel? What are they made from?
Yeah, I've not pushed us too hard, but we have spoken to a lot of architects over the last 2 years, and one of the key things that keeps coming back to us is that if they had extra time, if we gave them an extra 60 hours on every single project, what would they do with it? And the common response has been we would spend more time researching the materials that are used in our buildings so that we were getting better outcomes from our specification. That was the number one response. So, I think we need to get past the time barrier or the perception of time barrier and actually start concentrating on outcomes. One last thing I do want to say is I've read that you guys at Breathe, your sustainability IP is free to the market.
Yeah, well,
Is
we've
correct?
got we've got a whole bunch of guides on our website that are open source, and we're happy to share that information with the wider community. So we do a lot of talks, and yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm hoping you can maybe put my details
in post production. I'll just chuck up the website location for that documentation and maybe just some generic email address.
Yeah.
And
Lastly, just I would say that so when I said we integrate sustainability into what we do, we're actually doing sustainability consultancy like in-house. So for our projects, we are doing sustainability management plans. We're doing, of course, the LCAs. We're doing thermal models as well. We do that in-house. And slowly but surely, we are starting to introduce that to like-minded fellow architects in our industry as well. So we've got a few runs on the board there. So I guess sharing what is a lived experience that goes back about 25 years, lots of lessons, lots of learnings, and yeah, lots of insights hopefully as well. Yeah.
operators. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on today.
All right. Thank you, Barry. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Bye.